What's going on, Hobby Lobby? It's your boy Javier with the Javier Show. Make sure you say it twice. All right, I gotta do a reaction and breakdown of this Neil deGrasse Tyson clip with Ben Shapiro asking him about his thoughts on transgenderism and the whole LGBTQ community in general when it comes to science and what does the science say. We got to talk about this, and I hate that I got to talk about this because I honestly feel like I'm a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I feel like this interview just kind of really let me down. So let's actually jump into the video.
1 in a million to 1 billion. Too hot to be in the kitchen. I'll end up melting the ceiling.
All right. If y'all don't know who Neil deGrasse Tyson is, you need to get up on it. If you don't know who Ben Shapiro is, you also need to get up on it. So I'm not really going to give any background on these guys because you should already know who these guys are. If you are into the world of politics, if you love science or any of that, you should already know who these two guys are. They're big names. And if you don't know, go check them out. I highly recommend it. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I couldn't be more upset with this video, but let's actually get into it. I'm going to try to get through the whole video this time because I think it's a lot here. So, boom.
It seems like the left is militating against the advent of science. One of those areas is the area of transgenderism. The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic.
All right, I want to stop this video real quick and just to point out the fact that I don't think Neil deGrasse Tyson is actually what you would consider to be qualified to speak on the biology of a man and a woman. I think that because Neil deGrasse Tyson is such a big celebrity figure when it comes to science, it's only natural that Ben Shapiro wants to ask him this question. I mean, I'm kind of curious to see what Neil deGrasse Tyson's thoughts are on this. Whether or not he will be public about it is a different situation. But the fact that Ben Shapiro is bringing this up to an astrophysicist in terms of something that's going on biologically with the human DNA and genome and all of that stuff, I don't think Neil deGrasse Tyson is actually the most qualified person to speak about it. But he is a world-renowned scientist, so
defect.
I'm happy to opine on this.
Okay. Happy.
This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender.
All right, so this was also disappointing in my opinion. This was the first time that I realized that Neil deGrasse Tyson was actually letting me down here. He said this only matters because we separate sports by gender, right? Well, in what other way would we separate sports in the first place? Should we just throw all men and women into the same basket and just let them just go for it? I mean, why is it that we have separation in sports in the first place? It goes down to the fundamental question of competition, fair competition. And not only that, women spent a long time trying to get their own in this country. They spent decades trying to get equal rights and to have their own lane to compete in. You know, the WNBA and all of these women sports that's across all of these different sports. I don't watch sports a lot, so I don't know the necessary term. But women have fought to get their way into these sports, and they wanted to do it against themselves and compete. They didn't want to go compete with other men because it's just not fair physically based on our biology and how men on average are built versus women, especially when you're talking about athletes who are like at the peak condition. So it matters, but it's much deeper than just because we separate men and women in sports. It goes into a broader question about society and how we organize ourselves and what many people have sacrificed in order to achieve. And here we are reducing it down to just the fact that men and women have separate sports. when it's not as simple.
Otherwise, why do you even give a shit? what someone identifies with? So this is.
It matters if we have to understand science. It matters how we organize ourselves in society. It matters about what nature has instilled in us and what we've learned that works. It matters because we have to ask our questions and what's the best way to raise families? What's the best way to conduct ourselves in society? What are the gender roles? How do we organize ourselves in the best way? Because if we just want to live in a society where there are no rules, where there are no norms, and everything is just a free-for-all, there's no structure, that society is not meant to last long. So it matters how we categorize ourselves and how we identify, because other people have to identify you as well. Other people are in society, and we need to try to make the simplistic way of dealing with one another. And the moment you start to blur those lines too far, people will not be able to genuinely and naturally react to those differences and actually function in society in a way that's, what would you say, cohesive or effective.
We live in a free country and with consenting adults and people free expression of who and what they are.
Man, on adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter what you teach your children.
Saying. And so there's the matrix.
See, Ben Shapiro is trying to bring up the fact that, okay, well, on an adult level, I agree with you, but we do need to talk about children. But I don't think Neil deGrasse Tyson really actually wants to go there. And I'll say this. Adults should be able to do what they want. Everybody should have freedom to behave as they choose as long as they're not infringing on somebody else's rights. The moment you start to allow what you're doing to become a problem for other people and getting in the way of how they express their rights, that's when you should be stopped. So if adults want to do something that's not bringing any harm to anyone else, go for it. I 100% agree with both of them on this whole fact.
Tricks of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all.
But we're not talking about what people are choosing to do with their behaviors. We're talking about science. We're talking about the biological truth between a man and a female, he and a she, or how they express themselves in society. We're talking about science here. It's not about what people want to do. It's about what does the science say, and should we listen to the science, and does the science matter? That's what this conversation is about. It's not about, oh, we're going to find out that the science says one thing, and then we're going to use that to abuse or to mistreat other people and take away their rights. Anybody who decides that they're going to use something to actually infringe on other people's rights are idiots. And the fact that people like to frame this conversation in this whole dynamic where if you know the truth about this scientific thing that we discovered, that somehow you're going to weaponize it and use it against people. Well, you can say that about literally anything. You can do the same thing with climate science. You can say, oh, well, because the climate science says this, we should therefore be able to infringe on other people's rights to prevent them from having any cause on the climate crisis that we're dealing with. You can do that with literally anything in science. It doesn't even have to be scientific. So this whole need to shield people from the scientific truth based on what some bad actors might do with that information is just it's a nonsensical argument. It doesn't make any sense.
Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay,
Well,
this is for their own freedoms.
Well, one would also have to bring up the fact that there are people out there who want to control how you address other people. They're actually requesting that you speak a certain way. If it's a common courtesy, that's one thing. But the fact that there are people out there who advocate that it should be a hate crime if you accidentally misgender somebody or call them by the wrong term, that you are somehow a criminal or that you're somehow producing a level of hate against this person, which is on the level of violence, which some people would argue. Now, that is controlling other people's behavior. It's not telling you that you should be transgender yourself, but it's actually requesting that you change your behavior or behave a certain way in order to accommodate a very small portion of the population.
Because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved. And I've followed that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones.
I got a simple solution for anybody out there listening. What do we do about sports? Create a transgender league. If you are transgender or somebody who doesn't identify as a he or a she based on your biological sex, then you should be able to have the choice to compete in an all transgender sport. Create a new league for transgenders. And if you are a transgender male or transgender woman who feels competent and fine with competing with other transgender people, go for it. Nobody's going to stop you. I don't think we should stop you. And honestly, I'd be interested to see how that plays out. I mean, I would love to see that transgender have their own league and they are able to play against people like themselves. And they agree to their own rules and they decide to go for it. I mean, I don't see a problem with that. Just like what women did with their sports. They decided that, okay, men's sports are not for us. We're going to create our own leagues and our own lane, and we're going to actually compete against one another. Go for it. That's my solution.
Manifest differently in different people, and have just the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage. So I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your I mean, this is fun I had. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to land. But
I at least appreciate that he's thinking about something. Look, there are smarter people out there who are trying to solve some of these issues. And the fact that at least we are looking for solutions. But at the same time, until we figure out a solution, I really honestly don't agree with the fact that we should just be placing transgender athletes wherever they choose to go and giving them an unfair advantage in certain fields or certain sports. I don't think that's the actual proper way to go. And I talk to many transgender people who actually feel that same way. A lot of them don't feel like they should be competing in sports where the biological sex is not their own. And it could be an advantage for biological men who actually become transgender women and they go compete against biological women and they decide that they are going to dominate that sport. And it has happened on a few occasions that I can think of off the top of my head. But it may not be the other way around when there's a biological woman who transitions and wants to compete against male sports. Is it possible that that person could actually outcompete the men in that sport? Of course it's possible. But on average, how likely is it? I don't really think it's likely, in which it wouldn't make sense to do in the first place.
But the WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be you'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports area.
Yeah, tell me, I don't know.
So it would be talking your book about.
Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't know. Look, Neil, come on, man. You don't know. This whole LGBTQ movement has been going on for a while now. I find it hard to find any adult with half a brain who does not know about these particular issues and not paying attention enough, especially when you're somebody who's really engaged with science. And this is a scientific issue that people have been debating for a long time. The fact that Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't know, I really find that hard to believe. And I also sympathize with him at this moment because Neil deGrasse Tyson has an image. Like it or not, he has a major influence. He doesn't want to make the mistake of saying something that could harm not only himself, but all the people that work for him, all of the organizations that he works with. It's a very delicate subject, and he doesn't want to put himself in a position to be canceled. And the fact that we have scientists who are in a position where they have to be concerned on whether or not they can speak truth about science should concern all of us. It should concern the people on the right and the left. Because if we can't trust our scientists to be truth about scientific issues, you're going to get conspiracy theories. You're going to get people who don't trust the science. You're going to get people from all different walks of the spectrum who just don't take these people seriously. This is the biggest problem I have with this interview. And I don't even think the worst part has come up yet.
about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right
Yes.
now, children are being taught about the quote unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory based idea.
No, wait, hold on.
This is where the dishonesty comes in that with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I was so disappointed.
People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's
I don't
that's a social
Yeah,
a social
sure.
point, not a scientific point.
It's
Meaning we express ourselves.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is tap dancing right now. He's tap dancing. You're tap dancing. Like literally you're tap dancing right now. Well, you know, people express themselves on the spectrum, and that's a fact. You should teach that in school. Yeah, but you know, that's not what Ben Shapiro is asking right now. He's not asking that. He's talking about the scientific truth on whether or not somebody can be of one sex and identify as another sex.
hold on.
Based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But it
remains to be determined. You're a scientist, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I hope that I one day get to meet Neil deGrasse Tyson because I'm a big fan of his. But you're a scientist. You know that real science should be taught in a science class. Whatever the science actually says should be taught in a science class. It shouldn't be whether it's to be determined or not. Ask him, Ben Shapiro, what do you think? Do you think a biological man can really be a woman? Do you think a biological woman can really be a man? Ask him, because I'm really curious to know what he thinks about this.
is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So
the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this?
There it is. But where are you going with this? Well, first, acknowledge whether or not it's true. Then we can talk about the implications of it. Then we can discuss whether or not is it smart that we go down this path? Is it a great thing that we discover what's true and what's being taught to kids? Where are you going with this? Neil deGrasse Tyson, you know where we're going with this. Science is science, and we should be discovering the truth and teaching scientific truths in science class to children. And if it's not scientifically true, we shouldn't be teaching that in science classes. The same problem you would have with religious people teaching that the earth is 6,000 years old, should have a problem with somebody teaching that a biological man can be a biological woman, or at least be treated as such. Because when you go into the doctor's office, their problems ain't the same. There has to be a noticeable difference there that children need to understand. And you should also teach children that regardless of what people identify as, regardless how people choose to live their life, if they're not harming you, if they're not going out of their way to infringe on your rights, maybe it's a smart idea to treat people with decency and respect. Because let's face it, we live in a society with people from all different walks of life and backgrounds. And we have to be able to agree to a certain level of what we value in this country in order to get along. That just may mean as well, I don't come and piss on your lawn. It may not be a law or something, but it might just be a common decency as a person in society living amongst others. So yes, we can acknowledge scientific truth and still treat people of transgender on the transgender spectrum like human beings, and we don't have to treat them lesser or denigrate them or whatever the case may be. But first, you have to acknowledge what the science says, and then we can decide from there where we go.
What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's how.
That's what science is about. What do you mean what you're trying to accomplish? Science is all about, finding out and trying to discover the truth. trying to see what the answers are. You don't even have to have a motivation to want to discover something. You could just be intrigued. You can be interested. That's all it takes to ask a scientific question, to form a hypothesis, to do an experiment. Why does it matter what your intentions are to find out what the science says? Are you telling me that people shouldn't seek the truth, Neil deGrasse Tyson? And I think I know you better than this.
It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true.
Yes.
Like why is it bad or wrong to point out?
I have another way to approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world.
Okay.
As a scientist.
Okay.
But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true.
Okay.
And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society,
mm-hmm.
if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only...
You're dodging the question. You're dodging the conversation again. Yes, if people express themselves on a wide variety of different spectrums or however people feel, okay, that's fine. But the fact that if we don't have the answers to why that is, or if we are still trying to search for the answers and explain all this, you're still not saying that we should be teaching children that it's a fact that a biological man could be a biological woman or vice versa. Neil, I'm not asking you to speak out against transgenders. I'm not asking you to take a hard stance on what you think their rights should be or what policies should be. I'm asking you a simple question. I think that's what Ben is asking. If the science says one thing, should we be teaching what the science is, regardless of how we behave after the fact? And I don't think he wants to answer that question. You can do your studies and stuff, but until the science is final, until we have a clear understanding of this, maybe we should avoid teaching it to kids at all. Maybe we should just be teaching kids, hey, there are people out there who are different. There are people out there who have different experiences than you. But when you meet a person, you try to show them respect. You try to treat them like a fellow human being. We all have our own different issues that we're dealing with, problems that we're dealing with, some good, some bad, and we all come from different walks of life. Just treat people with some decency, and hopefully they'll treat you with decency in return. But when it comes to science, either it's supported by the science or it isn't. And that's what we should be teaching in science classes to children.
Sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say, it's not biological, it's just your this, it's real and it's there.
Well,
because...
All right. Well, I'm gonna keep this video going. I'm trying to get through the whole thing, but before I get back into the rest of it, if you find value in my videos, go ahead down there right now. Please hit the subscribe button. I'm not really one to beg for subscribers and people to like. And, you know, if you find value in the content, I hope that you just support the show the best way that you can. And if you please want to take it a step further, go to the JAVIER show at patreon.com and become a member today for $5.99 a month. And also, I'm going to be doing Q&As here on out. So please come over and join me for my live Q&As. I'm hoping to do my first one on Tuesday, tomorrow at 7 p.m. So please come over and I'll try to answer all of your questions. Now let's get back into the video.
It's real because it manifests.
But it is real because it manifests. But the question of how to classify manifestation is a scientific question, meaning that, for example, there was a woman over at Brown University.
Mm-hmm.
She came out with a study that suggested that there was a phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, in which a member of a particular group would suffer from gender dysphoria, and this person's immediate peer group would suddenly have an onset of gender dysphoria. This paper was so controversial that Brown tried to pull it, and then was forced to reassign it later. You see this sort of treatment.
That's a different question. What you're asking now is, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically?
Neil deGrasse Tyson. I can't even really focus in this video because this is a major letdown. Neil deGrasse Tyson is tap dancing around this whole issue. And to me, it just seems like he's trying to direct the conversation anywhere else except what does the science say about biological men and women? I think he's trying to, tap dance. And I think it does a disservice to the transgender issue. It does a disservice to science as a whole. It does a disservice to anybody with a thinking brain who's trying to really figure out these issues and know where to go from here. And we look to people in the scientific community to be as honest as they possibly can about the science and to inform us and trust the people to make good decisions with the information that they give us. And now I feel like I'm being coddled. I feel like I am being mentally massaged because Neil deGrasse Tyson is afraid of saying something or talking about what the science actually says on this particular topic because he doesn't want the consequences that comes with it. And it doesn't have to be either or. You can simply say what the science says, and then you can have a separate conversation about how we should treat people in society. But that's not what we're doing here.
Right.
And is there some taboo? And Sam Harris speaks a lot about this.
Yes.
And I think the concern is if you study some topic that's a hot button topic and you bring scientific methods and tools to it, we don't trust, I'm interpreting here, I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms.
Now you're making a libertarian argument or maybe a conservative argument that we shouldn't give these politicians enough power to do such things. Yeah, it muddies the water because at the same time, people who fall on the left side of the spectrum are always looking to allow the government to expand their power in some shape, form, or fashion in order to fix the problem that they want fixed. But also, we don't trust the same government to make the right decisions and not to infringe on other people's rights. Because somehow people believe that the people that are in power that agree with them will always have the power or should always have the power, and therefore they're willing to grant them more and more of it. This is just a bad interview. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, this is really, really doing a disservice to your field. Not your field, but this is doing a disservice to science. It's not a separate question.
In the face of that information. I think that's the fear.
Well, isn't that?
It's a fear.
I mean, and isn't that?
We don't trust our own ability to govern ourselves in the face of what could be some information relative to other kinds of information.
It's still not. Okay, let's say I agree with you. I agree with you, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't trust the people in power. I don't trust the politicians to make the right decisions. But also, you as a scientist, I'm pretty sure you would agree 100% that you should give people the science and let them make up their own minds and decide for themselves what society they want to live in. The moment the people who have the information withhold that information from the people and decide what they're going to give them and tell them, you're manipulating the population. You're deciding what other people should do with their lives because of the information that you're withholding or not giving them. This is manipulation 101. Oh, well, people are not trusted enough with this information, so therefore we should keep them in the dark. That's anti-scientific.
Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Yes. Yeah, it's not. It means it's not a free society.
And let's be fair here. Are there scientific truths that we shouldn't know about in society? Should somebody be able to create the smallpox disease and distribute it widely across the internet for everybody and their mama to be able to see it and to replicate it? Of course not. But we're not talking about something that's a deadly disease or something that can kill millions of people. We're talking about what does science says about biological sex and what should we do with that information? And to me, it's simple. Give us the information, allow us to decide for ourselves. And I'm pretty sure that most people will err on the side of freedom, liberty, and protecting people's rights.
Not a society of free inquiry, which I think you need ultimately. But yeah.
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out. I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides
is, what is your motivation?
Why does that matter?
It matters because if you have political power, you could end up creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms.
You could do the same thing the other way around. If you have political power, you could use that information to give people more freedoms, to give people more rights. That looking at the negative doesn't negate the fact that it could be positive as well. You're choosing to allow what negative consequences could be as a way of avoiding what people should be able to decide for themselves. That's bad logic.
As you. The history of that exercise
Then make a better argument.
Doesn't end well.
Well, but the history of which exercise? Bring out all the science and let's hash it out.
I'm saying if you bring out all the science and the politicians hash it out, the history of that exercise is a recipe for disaster if it involves discoveries that put people's freedom as defined in our Constitution at risk.
But now you're arguing for limitations on areas of particular study.
No, I'm arguing on we need a way.
You're arguing for censorship. You're arguing that certain studies shouldn't be able to be conducted. Certain scientific truths shouldn't be able to be known. That's what you're arguing for, Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's exactly what you're arguing for. And look, I'm a fan of yours. And this is just bad. You're making an argument that we should be kept in the dark about certain things in order to calm your fears. Let's just be honest here.
To shield, we need a way to protect people's freedoms in the face of whatever gets discovered scientifically.
Okay.
So
I'll give it.
I agree. I think that's what the Constitution is for, is to guard rights from.
But we're always fighting people who want rights are always fighting others who are saying they don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily challenge on the progressive left. It is a daily challenge, right? Here's an example. I forgot how I ended up getting this phone call. It was some magazine that serves the gay community. And they want, I remember why, because they wanted my opinion on, they wanted my opinion about whether being gay was biological or mental.
Right, there's that new study that came out, this vast.
Why are people even asking Neil deGrasse Tyson what his view is on the biological forefront of transgenderism or any of this stuff? He's not a biologist. I understand that he's a scientific figure in the world and people respect his opinion, but they should be calling biologists, people who study biology, to find out what they think about it, not an astrophysicist. So you idiots out there who ask an astrophysicist what he should think about biology, you're idiots. Just because somebody is a celebrity and famous for one thing in science doesn't mean that they're an expert in all fields of study when it comes to science. Freaking idiots. And this is what's wrong with our society. People trust everything a celebrity says. People trust everything that somebody with a big name or a lot of power says. You should trust the people who really, really know what they're talking about on specific areas.
Or psychological.
Right,
okay?
Right.
And I said, I don't care which it is. Find out what it is, fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on legislations or laws.
I agree to a certain extent. Whatever the scientific studies are, it should not ever allow you to hinder people's rights or hinder people's liberties in this country, take away their ability to seek for happiness and all of those things. You should never, ever allow something scientific to make you discriminate against anybody or to take away people's rights. Cool, got that. But also, well, we just don't know what scientific truths might be discovered that might cause us to rethink how we see rights or rethink how we practice laws or what laws we should have on the books. And to say never, I don't necessarily can say never, but I'm pretty sure I'm on the side of Neil deGrasse Tyson when it comes to most scientific truths should never, ever. And even if scientific truths do come about that may be better if we hinder certain people's rights, I still err on the side of liberty and freedom. I really do. And I agree with him on this.
Because, for example, suppose it said it's purely biological, okay? Then you say, oh, that explains it. Suppose it says it's purely psychological. What are you going to do now? You say, well, now you're going to go to the reorientation camps or whatever those are called, where they realign you because they say it's psychological rather than biological. All of a sudden, people start behaving in ways in society that want to constrict the freedom of expression of who and what people are. And that is a danger. So
y'all do the same thing with other people. People who have mental disorders and people who suffer from certain mental disabilities, and it affects the way that they operate in society. We have laws and policies on the books to deal with these people a certain way so that we can help them. If somebody is suffering from something that may cause them to be suicidal or suffer from depression based on something, we need to help them. And the only way to help them is to find out what's wrong with them and how we can possibly help them. And the ducking and dodging and just trying to say that we should live in somebody else's fantasy because it's better for them, it may not always be better for them. So we have to be able to look at these things honestly and discover for ourselves what's the best way to treat these people as well. And what's the best way to help them if they need help. But we can't talk about that.
Maybe there needs to be a line in the sand. Let science do what it does, but politicians keep us free. Yet there's so many politicians that are doing the opposite of that.
So
I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson make the argument that science should be informing policies, that science should be actually what the politicians are listening to in order to make informed, rational decisions about the real world. This is not give and take. It's not have your cake and eat it too. You can't decide to have it one way when it benefits you and then decide to turn it off when it doesn't.
why aren't you a libertarian? I mean, I'm a libertarian. Come over here. Just
okay.
The line is right here. Just join me over here. It seems like
that's exactly what I was saying. Like, it sounds like a libertarian argument, in my opinion, based on what was said. Now, I've been going on for over 30 minutes, and it's very clear that I think Neil deGrasse Tyson performed badly in this interview. He very much tapped around the whole conversation and tried to avoid answering it directly, and he went all about different ways of trying to change the topic, which is, in my opinion, it's very disappointing. I'm not mad at Neil deGrasse Tyson because at the end of the day, I understand the position that he's in. I just wish as a scientist, we could answer these questions straightforward and then deal with the implications of it afterwards and let people decide for themselves. And to me, it was just, it makes people distrust scientists. And I don't like that. And I always thought Neil deGrasse Tyson was somebody who stood for science no matter what the pushback was, especially when they talk about religious freedoms and people who want to hinder certain scientific truths based on what their religion says. If you're somebody who falls in that camp, you can't pick and choose when science is convenient for you and then omit the truth about science when it isn't. And that is the disagreement, and that's the disappointment that I have with Neil deGrasse Tyson on this particular video. Other than that, I really think Neil deGrasse Tyson has great work. I think you should go check him out. And I really think he has a lot to offer in his field and in science in general. And don't allow this one interview to make you disown or distrust Neil deGrasse Tyson in general. I think he has a lot to offer to people, and he very much educates people on a daily basis. Same thing with Ben Shapiro. I've watched Ben Shapiro from time to time. I sometimes like some of the things he says. I sometimes disagree with a lot of things he says, but it's hit and miss. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to ask you one more time before we go. Please like, subscribe, and share. That's all it takes. If you really want to support the show, help me get to 1,000 subscribers. And I got something special coming up for when we reach that number. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for participating. Until next time, you know what it is. Peace and glory. I'm out.
1 in a million to 1 villain. Too hot to be in the kitchen. I'll end up melting the ceiling.